Hello, I'm Sarah. This is Hardcover Hearts, and this is my week of reading wrap up where I talk about the books that I read this week, what I'm currently reading, and then potentially could read next week based on my mood. You probably can tell by my voice that I have been a little under the weather. I caught a cold. But luckily, it's not COVID. I had a little bit of a concern. I went out last week and went to two museums, wore my mask, all that was great, and then went out the next day for a picnic with my gals from my In Real Life book club. It was wonderful. It was just perfect being outside. Fantastic Berkeley meal. We maintained social distance. We had our masks unless we're eating, and then we put them back on. But somewhere in that extravaganza of being outside, I caught a cold. And it waylaid me for the week. Very little reading, but I had already done some amazing reading that I can talk to you about. Anyway, so that's good. But wanted to apologize for my voice. I don't want to wait until my voice sounds better because I read so fast that I don't want these videos to be really long. I try to keep them like under 25 minutes. And I hope that most of you speed up the pace with which you listen to it. So the first thing I want to do though is to thank Hannah at Hannah's Books for letting me know about something that I went out and purchased. There's an Etsy shop that does this. It's like this really cute, where we can see it, I'll lean back, cute Victober list of authors. I thought it was fantastic, so I went and purchased it. I'll put information below. So hats off to you, Hannah, for letting me know that this even existed. I thought it was perfect. So, all right, let's jump straight in because I have a lot of books to talk about. The first book I finished was Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller. Now, I read this with my In Real Life book club, and we were reading it for part of our reading of the Women's Prize shortlist that was for this year. Now, this book is very simple. The structure is not complex. The structure is very straightforward. There's not a lot of themes and fancy writing and literary prowess here. It's a very thoughtful, straightforward book about a family in crisis. What we have here is we open up with the story of Dot. And Dot is an elderly woman, and she lives with her two children in a dilapidated home. Now, I say her children. They are her offspring, but they are not kids. They are 51-year-old twins that live with her in this dilapidated home on an estate. It's like on a property of a big country estate. And they have been granted access to live in this home. It's been kind of told through since the children were very, very young, that they are allowed to live in this home for free. And the assumption is that something happened with Mr. Ralston. He is the owner of the country home that had to do with the death of their father. And because of that, it's always been known that they live there for their lives and they don't have to pay any rent. This is their home. Well, Dot has a stroke at the very, very beginning and dies in the home. And the twins, Jeannie and Julius Cedar, that's their names, are kind of left with then understanding the life that Dot protected them from. They've been raising their vegetables and chickens, and they live a very simple life. They do odd jobs. Julius does odd jobs. Dot is the one who takes care of the chickens and does the vegetables and sells them in town, in the small little village. But they're very isolated. And there's a lot of pride and a lot of ways that Dot kept the community out and maintained a very safe haven for herself and her adult children. But she was a very strong-willed person. And now that she's dead, what is going to happen? And I think I've read a lot of books this year that deal with very intense amount of poverty that goes very deep, that doesn't gloss over it, that goes into the day-to-day existence of people with extreme poverty. And this one was no exception. I thought it was a interesting look at how far things can go and how quickly they can kind of unravel, and how tenuous their life was, and ultimately how tenuous their life was, and they didn't even know it because of all of the ways that their mother kind of kept them from really understanding the depths of their poverty. I appreciate this book didn't take the predictable routes that I expected it to. There's some introduction of characters. You're like, oh, here's the savior. Here's the kind person who's going to help them. And, there's a lot of prickly characters in this book. And I think you may know that I enjoy difficult characters, and not as a means of like having them get their comeuppance, but just understanding how they move through the world and how other people interact with them. So I again, nothing truly fancy here, but a really good story, really compelling characters, a lot of pathos and a lot of difficulty, and no easy solutions were provided. I really liked it, and I'm sad it didn't. I don't know if I would have wanted it to win. But it's definitely up there among the short list for the Women's Prize this year. Then I read an Anthony Trollope, 800 pages of Can You Forgive Her? This is the Palliser series, first of the series. And this is a long book, y'all. I did this in audio, and even in audio, it was a really, really, really long book. But there is something very comforting in reading Trollope, I find. He's just kind of like this masterpiece theater, saga, a lot of these characters. And one thing that Trollope does really well is his villains are really villainous and extreme. And his good people are good, but there are always some things about them that will kind of drive you a little nutty. And this is only after having read 3. So this is my 3rd Victober, my 3rd Trollope. What I liked about this one is there's a real woman focus. And so we have Alice Vavasor, and Alice is in a pickle of her own making. So she is independently wealthy. Her father was not to be trusted, and so the fortune came to her, which makes her unique as a character in Victorian literature. She has a means to kind of make her own decisions, but she's not really trusted by society because she does not have a husband. She does not have a fiance. She's not moving in that direction. And in the circles that she moves in, this is a dangerous and precarious position for her to be in. But she has some autonomy. And, this is where Trollope is no feminist in any way, shape, or form, but he writes really interesting women characters. So we've got Alice. Alice has been betrothed and backed out of it twice, 2 times. And, this is the height of scandal. Now she's seen as, not a woman who owns her own mind and wants to live her own fortune, but someone who's precarious and is cruel and lives whimsically. And she's not any of those things at all. She's very thoughtful, and she's very careful and assiduous and doesn't really want to be committed to anyone. And she isn't really convinced that she's ever been in love. And she really looks at the men in her milieu and all these men that are given to her and surrounding her as kind of lacking. None of them is sparking anything in her. She has feelings and she has admiration and she likes some of these men, but she doesn't see herself committing her entire life to these men. And can you blame her? Not can you forgive her? Can you blame her? Should be what it should be called. And so there's Anthony Trollope does this thing where he's constantly like, and reader, can you forgive her? Which is, kind of like tongue in cheek. I found it fun. The men here are either very valiant and reliable and just steady, good men, that are principled, or they're like completely chaotic and no scruples, emotional, immature, like flighty. They almost are the stereotypical, women in hysterics and all of this. So I find that to be really fun as a trope to kind of switch the genders there. We have Lady Glencora, who is cousin of Alice, and she is just, she's insufferable. Very flighty. She's married very, 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 very well with incredible wealth, but she is thinking about leaving and running off with her lover and having an affair. And so if you think about the time to even be writing about a woman wanting an affair and being in love with somebody else, that's pretty racy right there. But she's insufferable. And then you have Kate, who's another cousin who's meddling. She has machinations that she wants to get her brother together with Alice. And she thinks that her brother can do no wrong. And she is, so wrong. Her brother is he's kind of shiftless and doesn't really have anything going for him, but he decides he's going to go for Parliament. And so he, without really being a principled man, starts to go through the steps of trying to get elected into the House of Commons. I really like that side of the story as well, of what does it take to get into Parliament. You've got the House of Lords, House of Commons, and the different ways that these men are trying to weigh influence, and it plays into the relationships of all of these women. Hey, look, if you like Trollope, if you've tried Trollope, this is a good book. I still think The Way We Live Now was the best way that I could have gotten into Trollope. I still think that was, kind of a really good entry point, but I'm very happy that I read this. I like this a little more than I do The Warden, which I read last year. So yay, another good Anthony Trollope under my belt. Next up is something that I didn't really enjoy as much as I expected that I would. And I thought I would be in the minority with my buddy reader, Elizabeth of Bookish North, but we both kind of landed in the same place. And this is Orlando by Virginia Woolf. So Orlando is the gender-bending kind of fantastical fantasy novel of Virginia Woolf, where she has a character who begins the novel as a man, as a boy, and then through time evolves and has him undergo this magical change and become a woman. This spans centuries. It's kind of like this fantasy romp where she just let her imagination fly, and everything is up for grabs. It's whimsical. There's a lot of satire. There's a lot of talking about poets and society, and it has a lot that is admirable. It has a lot that was mind-blowingly ahead of its time. A lot that resonates in your mind because these scenes were just so crafted so beautifully. They like sit in space and you could see it, and it evokes so much. But there's also something that I cannot get past with Virginia Woolf, and I'm so angry about it. So I'm going to read you the first paragraph, chapter 1, first page of Orlando. Now, I will let you know that this has some horrific racism. And don't take my word for it. I'm going to read it to you so that you can be the judge. And so for anybody who says like, oh, well, it was the time and you can't judge, I challenge you on this. Okay, here we go. He, for there could be no doubt of this sex, though the fashion of the time did something to disguise it, was in the act of slicing at the head of a Moor, which swung from the rafters. It was the color of an old football, and more or less the shape of one, save for the sunken cheeks and the strand or two of coarse, dry hair, like the hair on a coconut. Orlando's father, or perhaps his grandfather, had struck it from the shoulders of a vast pagan who had started up under the moon in the barbarian fields of Africa, and now it swung gently, perpetually, in the breeze which never ceased blowing through the attic rooms of the gigantic house of the Lord who had slain him. That is the first paragraph. The note in the back, which refers to this, because I'm reading the Oxford World Classics edition, says, a Moor, a native of Northwest Africa, in the Middle Ages and early modern period, the term was used more broadly to denote a native of Africa. The next paragraph. Orlando's father had ridden in fields of asphodel and stony fields and fields watered by strange rivers, and they'd struck many heads of many colors off many shoulders and brought them back to hang from the rafters. So too would Orlando, he vowed. But since he was 16 only, too young to ride with them in Africa or France, he would steal away from his mother and the peacocks in the garden and go to his attic room and there lunge and plunge and slice the air with his blade. Sometimes he cut the cord so that the skull bumped on the floor and he had to string it up again, fastening it with some chivalry almost out of reach, so his enemy grinned at him through shrunken black lips triumphantly. What? How am I supposed to like this character? How am I supposed to feel? That is the start of it. Even later on, she uses the N-word, just casual racism. Later on, in where Orlando is now a woman in more contemporary time. I can't. We can't say that her words are magnificent. We need to really listen and really understand. And she paints such beautiful pictures, or she paints such imaginative, interesting things that we should pay attention to, and yet ignore things like that. Or at least I can't. I can't. So yeah, the racism bothered me. I couldn't get it out of my head as we move through. There are beautiful, beautiful, stunning images, stunning things. But in the end, I also realized that I need more context. Or it just feels like we're just in this poetic kind of dropping little things, and we're just supposed to pick them up and look at each of them individually, and it doesn't string together for me. I like a little bit more consistency. I like a little more continuity and a little more context. But even so, I think the key point here for me is, even if there was more context in the book and the magical system that she was creating here made more sense to me, I still wouldn't be able to get past the racism. So that's me and kind of where I stand with that as such a qualifier for me. I can't get past it. So that's that. Let's talk about what I'm currently reading. So I mentioned last time that I was going to take Jennifer's advice. Jennifer, who I'm buddy reading David Copperfield with, I'll talk about that in a moment. And I was just going to approach Proust completely differently. I wasn't going to treat it as this like savory, delicious little morsel that I just slowly, tantalizingly took a little amuse-bouche type of approach with, right? I was actually gonna read it like any other novel and just straight in, just go for it. And I read 100 pages yesterday. And I have to say, it's a completely different experience. I'm enjoying it. I'm not as precious with it. I'm not as reverential, and I'm enjoying it. And I think I feel a bit more of a pace developing. So I'm quite happy with that. I'm about 80% through now. Go me. So expect to maybe see this done by next week. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. I should mention, this is In Search of Lost Time, Volume 3, The Guermantes Way, translated by Mark Treharne. Yeah. And then I mentioned David Copperfield. So I'm doing the buddy read with Jennifer, and we're just enjoying it very much. Now, I am behind. I needed to beg off because I couldn't possibly read a single line while I was sick. So she has granted me a little more time, and hopefully I'll be able to catch up today. I just love this little Macmillan Collector's Edition. They have the little ribbon, the gold foil, the etchings inside. It's just delightful, and it just sits so nicely in your hand, even though it's a really hefty book. The print is not too small. It's delightful. I'm so happy that I have these. And I've got quite a few Victober type of classics in this style. So that's still going well. David Copperfield is just charming, but he's starting to grow up and starting to deal with some real world pressures and real world issues. So we'll see how he handles it. Then I'm doing a completely different buddy read with Leo of A Little Book Life. I showed this on Instagram. This is Alice Adams' Rich Rewards. My cover is starting to come undone. Ugh, I hate that. So I'm going to have to tape it down for fear of splitting it entirely. Really lovely cover here. So I've mentioned before that I read Superior Women by Alice Adams, which I really liked. It was a kind of a coming age story of these 4 women at college and kind of how the women pair off and help each other and the frenemies and their lives and growing up as young sexual beings at college. I thought it was a really fantastic, frank look at women and their sexuality and the challenges that they deal with in relationships. And what Alice Adams does very well is she doesn't shy away from sex. It can be incredibly frank about it, like eye-poppingly frank sometimes, because you're just not expecting it, or at least I wasn't expecting it. And then all of a sudden, boom, there it is. But she writes about it not in a romance way. It's just a part of life. I keep wondering why Alice Adams doesn't appear more in used bookstores, why I don't hear about her. She's from the Bay Area. She writes about the cross-section of culture and class, artists and rich people. She's writing about different races. She's writing in a very San Francisco way about the 1970s, 1980s. It definitely feels dated, And I have to say, I despised the 80s. I lived through it and it was sheer hell. But I think I've been a little snobby about that time frame. And I can imagine for someone who didn't live through it, this would be a fascinating read in seeing how far we've come. But in thinking about why I don't see her, I'm wondering if she's getting relegated to the Erica Jong Fear of Flying era, of this sexually liberated writer who wasn't writing romance, but was writing about sex. And it's not the only thing that she writes about. she's definitely writing women-centric stories, but sex is a part of that. And her characters are sexual beings. Like, they are absolutely looking for and expecting to have sexual relationships. And it's not always about a relationship. It's about sexual encounters sometimes. It's that shift of dynamic. Leo and I were just laughing about how frank she is in some of this. Anita Brookner, if she was reading this, would drop it with a gasp. Without a doubt. She's almost the anti-Anita Brookner because her writing is not stylized. It's very simple. It's very spare. The story comes out and the characters come out. Leo and I have been having very interesting conversations about this because it's not a book I would normally pick up, but I'm interested. There's something here and I'm going to explore it more. So we're halfway through. I'm probably finish it today. And so expect a review of this next week. That's it for me for now. Thank you so much for watching. I'm curious, have you read any of the books that I mentioned? What are your thoughts? And as always, please maintain safe social distance with other people when you're out. We are still in a global pandemic. Wear your mask, wash your hands frequently, and don't touch your face. Get vaccinated if you can. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.